So I'm trying out a new camera, and I may as well talk about something. So I decided to talk about Dressed to Kill, Brian De Palma's classic thriller from 1980. By the way, I just bought that doggone 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, only to find out they're going to release a new one in March with special commentaries and a really cool cover design, whatever. Still has mostly the same stuff that this has. This has the 4K transition and all that, so I probably won't buy the new one, but you know, it's a classic. As I said, it's a pure Brian De Palma film, meaning he wrote it, he came up with the story. It got critical acclaim when it came out, and it did really well at the box office. I mean, it was controversial, but it did really, really well at the box office, and so it kind of was the trifecta: an original creation that was a big hit. So, but these days, when people talk about Dressed to Kill, it's controversial now. I mean, even, it was always controversial, but it's controversial in a different way now. It's considered a problematic film. And I get it, right? It features, I mean, obviously, spoilers here. In fact, I'm going to probably mention spoilers in Psycho too. So if you haven't seen either one of these films, you might want to come back to me later. But it's about I was about to say transgender, but he's a cross-dressing killer. Certainly wants to transition officially from male to female. But the premise is that when the male side becomes aroused sexually, the female side, the Bobby character, becomes defensive and turns to murder. It's the Psycho plot. I mean, before we go any further, it's very familiar because it's from Psycho. Brian De Palma always intended this to be an homage to Psycho, his own kind of version of Psycho. But instead of Norman Bates, when he gets turned on, becoming his mother, this is a different male character who, when he gets turned on, becomes the transgender Bobby. Now, or becomes the female Bobby, however you want to put it. So, people seem to think, aha, either the movie is suggesting that Bobby, because Bobby's transgender, or trans, wants to make that transition, that's why they're a murderer. It's this person has a psychological issue because they're trans. Or even if the movie isn't saying that, we are concerned that the LGBTQ community, or at least some in the LGBTQ community, will be offended by this, that they will infer that the movie is suggesting there's something wrong with them. I submit that that's not at all what this movie is saying. If you really pay attention, and I think this is part of the problem, we like to think that we're very, alert when we watch movies. We like to think that, we keep, that we pay attention, but the fact is we don't often follow sometimes the plots to these things. And if you really pay attention, there's actually a psychologist near the end of the film that explains what's going on with Bobby. And at one point in time, the psychologist even says, I couldn't recommend the transition surgery because Bobby was too unstable. Now that suggests to me, what the psychologist is saying, is that he has suggested the surgery for others. He has suggested the official transition to others. And the only reason he's not for Bobby is because Bobby was already, unstable. He was, or the Bobby character, or the original person that Bobby was already unstable to begin with. And the transition thing, the identity situation that the Bobby character is going through is merely a trigger. But a psychopath can be triggered by anything, right? A murderer can be triggered by anything, and oftentimes those are just excuses. It's just a trigger. It's rare. I mean, not there are, it's just a trigger. It's a rare thing, for any trans person, at least that I've heard of in the news, is going to be involved in something like this. A few years ago, there was a story about a young trans person who walked into a school and into a classroom and committed a mass shooting and killed a bunch of kids. Highly unusual, never happens typically, but it does show, a trans person can be just as guilty as any, person, as any American especially, at committing these type of crimes. So that's all this movie is saying. I mean, it's not a social commentary, this film. In fact, there's a moment in the movie where Brian De Palma is showing Michael Caine's character and Nancy Allen's character watching the same episode of Donahue, and that episode of Donahue features a transgender person, a very sort of, I hate to use the word normal, but a very, a person who seems to have a good head on his shoulders, or her shoulders, was a veteran, served in the military, had a sort of winning personality, and they just happen to be trans. This, it seems to be your perhaps your typical trans person. Just like that mass shooting situation, that was isolated, very rare. This is an isolated character that Brian De Palma is depicting in Dressed to Kill. And it's just meant to be kind of a fun, scary, thrilling, psychological suspense thriller, and one of his best. So I think part of the problem is we progressives, and I consider myself a progressive. I even consider myself a bit woke, albeit kind of a old school, older generation woke, I guess. But I will admit we can be so sensitive to other people who, we do have a tendency, and I think rightfully so, to stick up for those who are marginalized and who aren't treated, fairly, and certainly the LGBTQ community, are in that category. But sometimes we can be so sensitive to these things that we're not actually giving them enough credit, not giving enough credit to the very people we're trying to help. Because I think many of us know when we watch Dressed to Kill, that's not, the movie and Brian De Palma are not suggesting that, that trans people are going to have this issue, are going to be, or are psychologically, disturbed. But we're still concerned that maybe the LGBTQ community will take that from the film. They will infer that. But that's where we're not giving them enough credit for being smart human beings, just as smart as any of us. They're just as human as any of us. Some might maybe do infer that, but I think a lot of them won't infer that because they're paying attention to the movie. And they like a great movie as much as anybody. In fact, I know there are people in the LGBTQ community that love Dressed to Kill. And so, like I said, give them some credit here. And they can defend themselves. If they have a problem with Dressed to Kill, they're going to tell you so. And and no, look, this is I want to say harmless. If a psychological thriller, about a murderous psychopath can be harmless, then this is a harmless thriller. It's an homage to Hitchcock, but it's also got those vintage Brian De Palma moments. Let's not take everything so seriously. Sit back, watch Dressed to Kill with an open mind. Let's not think too hard, and you will enjoy the stylishness, the music, the camera work, the performances, and enjoy one of Brian De Palma's masterpieces.